let's get started here. The first thing on the agenda is the consent agenda, December 10th minutes.
I had one little change, but it appears that I lost it. There was a, in the announcements, third to the last paragraph, it suggests that the new name is Equitable Communications Rule. That's Equitable Communities Rule. Maybe I garbled it last time the same way. So anyway, that's one change.
Is there a motion?
Did you get the change that I offered? Okay, all right. I move approval.
As amended.
Yeah.
Second? Ray, you said that.
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor? It's unanimous. Very good. Let's see, announcements. The next meeting is February 11th. And then staff update. Stu?
Okay, you ready for me then?
Yes.
I'll keep it short. Let's see, Bridget and I have been working on the new website. That'll be coming up. I think we'll have something more detailed to show you at the February meeting. So that's exciting. Bridget, do you want to say anything about what's coming up on your own behalf?
The campaign?
Sure.
Okay. We're getting ready to, or we're working on launching the Adopt Your Home campaign, which will run from March to June. And the campaign's based on the 4 pillars of renewable energy, responsible consumption, switching off of fossil fuels, and preparedness. So each month is going to be a different topic. So we're still working on that, and we'll be putting out more information about events and such.
Thanks, Bridget. See, some other things going on right now. Our zero emission vehicle incentives are unfolding quite nicely. We've had a number of people buy cars and bikes now, so we're getting that process in place. I've been working with many of you folks on your own individual projects, which has been lovely, and I'll save those updates for when we talk about those projects. Hoping to meet with Rick next week to talk about progress indicators and SEEP update planning, among other things. And I'll leave it there for now. I think that's a good brief update, unless there's questions about anything.
I have a question about reach code. You had mentioned something about that and something I saw. Anyway, is there an update on that?
No update. So I'm working with a group of cities that's putting forward a legislative concept that would require reach code to be a bit stronger and also to allow jurisdictions to adopt it as their base code. So Tanya's been involved in that a little bit. And there's a group, like I said, of other cities that's kind of involved in that. So we're a bit in the waiting phase right now. But I can talk to anybody else about that afterwards if you have questions.
Okay. Tanya?
Just a quick question, Stu.
I can hardly hear you.
Just a quick question about what we're doing to advertise the incentives, the vehicle incentives. Do you need some help? I haven't really seen it out in the community very much. And just wondering if there's a way for this commission to amplify that advertising.
Well, ideally, the Outreach Commission could assist with that, but I love it when all commissioners can tell their friends and neighbors about it. Feel free to link to the city page if you want. I think we're planning an article in one of the other commissions, or maybe actually it might have just been published but most people find it through the city website. We have a little blurb that was in the city source, which will recur again. But there's not a lot of, I'd say, active advertising for it. I expect that the bike incentives will easily be used up. And the electric vehicle incentives, likewise, I think will not require a lot of promotion, but certainly there's room to do more if folks want to contribute to the effort. Oh, and also we have an article coming out soon that will mention a bit about the clean fuel credits and how those are being used. So with your reference to those programs. Hey, Julian. And Chris.
Sue, is that the clean energy credits where they're being used? So we've already decided where we're going to spend that money, or
Well,
I'm not sure what you meant there.
The electric vehicle portion of it was kind of blessed by council a while back. And so we committed to that grant matching. But the rest of it, I expect I'll have an update for you guys next month about that.
Okay.
Okay, so you done, Stu?
Yep, unless there's more.
Okay. Anybody else have an announcement?
I don't.
Sorry?
I don't.
Okay. Right after our last Climate Policy Commission meeting, I had a chat with one of the commissioners from CCOC, and we had a discussion about how to interact between the commissions and that sort of thing. And I just want to repeat 4 suggestions that I made to him so that you're all aware of them. One way is for the chairs and vice chairs to meet occasionally to talk about overlaps and efforts or handoffs. We kind of started this in September, and then a lot of things happened, distracted us, but we need to get back on that. For specific projects, we can either have CCOC or CPC appoint someone. So the appointment of Gary at our last meeting is an example of that. He was appointed to reach out about the gas-powered lawn and garden equipment emissions. A third way is to utilize the announcements from other commissions' agenda item. We haven't had a whole lot of that happen yet. And then the last one was for members of one commission to participate as individual citizens assisting with another commission's project. So I just wanted to relate that discussion that I had with a different commissions member. Okay, if there's nothing else, then I think we can move on to reports from representatives of other commissions.
Rick, I had a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Are we going to plan then another meeting, joint meeting with the CCOC in the future?
Generally speaking, yes. There's no specific plans for that as yet. I think the place that I would start is, rather than just having a general meeting again, is for the chairs to get together and talk about what makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, so Bob?
Yeah, Rick, so on your, I guess your first point, you said you had 4 points. Have you been meeting regularly with the chair of and vice chair of the CCOC?
I have not. As I was trying to say, we last met in September and a lot of distractions happened.
Okay.
And so that hasn't occurred. Okay, so I presume this is Mark, because I don't know you. Welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Rick. I'm Mark Ballard with the Transportation Commission. I'm speaking on behalf of Linda Peterson Adams, who couldn't get here today for us. And she would like me to pass the message on that she encourages the CPC to support the work group's recommendations to reduce maximum speeds. Having 3 of the city's commissions, Transportation, Climate, and Conservation, united in their support, were served to clearly demonstrate to the council the importance of quickly moving forward and thus achieving in the short term the many benefits of reduced maximum speeds. But really anything that calls on the CPC to endorse reducing maximum speed limits would be great. And we will be discussing the rest of this on your 5.4.
Very good. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you guys for having us.
Okay, let's move on to public forum. I think Elizabeth sent out a couple of things from Lori Kaplan and Harlan Bittner. I assume that you all received those. In addition to those two, there was a email to the mayor that I threw into the public forum section. I want to publicly acknowledge that Sue Lundquist sent such an email and that you've all seen it. And finally, there was a note from Taffy Clark Pelton regarding leaf blowers. And so I just want to acknowledge that we have received all those communications from the public. If there's no discussion about any of those, then I'd like to move on to old. Oops, there is. Let's take Jeff first. Not sure who was first.
So SOCAN is going to do another outreach, another survey of the community. And should we talk to Lori Kaplan about, for example, my question is about the community's willingness to actually make changes or sacrifices to move things along faster than they wouldn't ordinarily do. So do we talk to her directly about that?
Bob says yes.
I think they,
She's telling me yes.
I think it would be easiest for all the commissioners to just engage individually with them if you have something to say.
He really is saying yes from right
I am
there.
saying yes, yes. And we'll be, we're going to be doing like a formal solicitation of ideas with certain dates to focus that topics. And we also welcome someone to be participate in the expert panel. We really want this to be a community effort and not just an effort of SOCAN. And we think the quality of the survey and the validity will be greatly improved by some good participation. So, but go ahead and email me if you want to talk about it. Sorry, I was out of order, sorry.
Gavel.
That's
Good
okay,
work.
Bob.
You read my mind, though. So Ray, I think you had your hand up too.
Yeah, it was with respect to the public input on the safe cities and fossil fuel proliferation. So I guess we'll have some further discussion on what, if Ashland should take formal positions with respect to these that are in line with our SEEP goals. And
Well, that's up to the commission whether they want to actually move forward with any of that or not. If there is a commissioner that wants it to become a part of a future agenda, then I will put it on the topic list and we'll get to it in due time.
Okay, I guess I'll look at it in more detail and see if that is something maybe we should be interested or not.
Okay. Okay, is there anything else about the public forum? Okay, let's move on to old business. The first item is who's going to take care of the action items this month? Not Ray.
Oh, okay.
Somebody needs to volunteer here.
I'll do it.
Thank you, Bob.
Oh, Bob's got it. All right.
Sorry?
I thought it was Stu that said he would do it, but it's Bob. Okay.
Bob beat everybody else to it. Good going, Bob.
And I don't think Stu should be volunteering for such a thing. He's got.
Yeah, I would agree.
Either.
I would agree.
I saw Jeff was also trying to get to it, but you're right. I was fast.
So I'll volunteer for next time.
Very good. Okay, commissioner recruitment. We still have one voting position and the 2 student positions open. I don't have any contact information for anybody to follow up on anybody. So I encourage anybody who might be listening to apply. There's plenty to be done. Okay, so 5.3, sorry, Tanya?
Yeah, I think there may be an application that may have been submitted in December. Stu, do you know if that potential applicant actually applied under
Who are you
Mayor
thinking of?
Stromberg?
I don't think so, but who are you thinking of? Or if you can say.
I'd have to look it back up again, but I'll double check and see if we have one that's in process. There may,
Okay.
I thought one was coming from December, but I'll double check.
Right, that's what my notes say. There's something out there, but I haven't actually seen anything. Okay, let's move on to 5.3, Ray.
Okay, we've got 3 plans that are near term for adoption by the council. The first one is the TAP master plan. I was kind of surprised to see this for March 16th adopt because I thought there was a lot of work between the 3 cities. I had given Scott some input originally, and he was thinking of pulling stuff from our water conservation plan or referencing it in our portion of the TAP. So I'll have to get with him and see. I haven't seen the latest draft, but again, that's March 16th for council adoption. There's the stormwater master plan. That is March 1st. There's going to be a study up for adoption in April 6th. I had given Scott a little bit of input on that, so I have to get with him and see where that is also. And then there's the capital improvements program, March 2nd for council adoption. I sent Scott Monday, copied some of you on some input to add some SEEP high-level goals just into the policy and goals section. No changes to the capital projects. And Scott seemed amenable to that, so I'm looking for him to put that in there before the March 2nd date. Any questions on those? Okay. The electric master plan, we're continuing to work on it together with the electrical group and staff. And then the Daniel Meyer pool, I think, Stu, we're still waiting for a date from Michael Black when we might have a meeting with the CPC to discuss the energy use for that.
Yeah,
the pool edition.
Still from the holidays.
Okay. And then the comp plan and the SEEP, I see we have later on in the agenda to discuss in more detail.
Any questions?
Yeah, I have one question. I think I saw in your, at the last item here about look aheads or work items, economic development plan. Did you think that's something we should be tracking? Or do you want me to look at it and see?
I am not, I'm looking at our topic tracking spreadsheet, and I'm not sure which item you're referring to.
The under comprehensive master capital planning. It's a big paragraph, but you mentioned the economic development plan in there.
Oh, here we go. Oh, yeah. Economic development plans generally have significant carbon impacts, and so I think it's important for us to track that as it changes.
Tanya, do you have any comment on that? Is this a plan that we work with the downtown businesses, or this is, I guess I'll have to look. I'm not as familiar with the economic development plan is. If it's incentives for new business in town or.
Right, so the city of Ashland works regionally with So Ready on regional economic development, and then we have elements within the city itself. I need to check to see really how those pieces work together, but I definitely agree with Rick that a lot of decisions about the direction for economic development have significant climate repercussions. And the same thinking that this commission is bringing to other master planning processes should be brought to the economic development realm as well.
Okay, is that?
But
plan
I will look
posted?
up and find
Okay.
out some more information.
Okay, and I'll see if that plan is posted somewhere on the city website. Because I'm not sure if it's, okay. So there's some work to do there, Rick. So we'll have to come back with you on that, adding that to the list that we're tracking. And that would be it.
Okay. If there's nothing else on that agenda item, then I think we're ready to move on to 5.4. Gary?
Hi, so Elizabeth, could you get Brian and Mark on the line here? It's we're going to share the presentation between each of the commissions that have been involved in the work group. And we plan to talk about 10 minutes, leaving about 20 minutes for questions and answers, and then enough time for the CPC to consider the recommended motion that the work group has put together. So that's kind of the time frame I'm hoping we can work with. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mark, who's previously introduced himself.
Great today. Thank you again. I'm Mark Rillard with Ashland Transportation Commission. We also have a contributing author with Brian Soul from the Ashland Conservation and Climate Outreach Commission. And of course, we have Gary Schaff with the Climate Policy Commission, City of Ashland. We did a 45-page report. Some of you guys have seen it, some of you haven't. So if you want to, ask Gary for it. But basically, lower maximum speed limits will reduce death, injuries, and pollution, and will lead to increased bicycling and walking and their associated health benefits. Ashland households, taken as a whole, that chose to shift from driving to walking or bicycling will save more than $1 million per year. You can see here some of the things you can look at, and part of it is safety from my aspect of it. You got one ahead of me there. It is tempting to dismiss the difference between 25 and 20 miles an hour as marginal unemployment. However, volumes of data show that it's quite contrary. There's a dramatic social and economic gains from 5 miles an hour reduction in speed limit. You can go 2 slides now. Sorry. So, for one, significant improvements in transportation system safety occur. When 20-mile-an-hour speed limits are installed in urban and residential streets, citywide risk of serious injury and fatality among pedestrians and cyclists drops by 40 and 30%, respectively. Their similarly effects elevate both actual and perceived safety levels for all transportation systems. So if you look at this right here, you can see that in the last 5 years, there was 2 fatalities in the city of limits of Ashland. If we do the proposed dropping by 5 miles an hour, that means we have only 1.1 death per every 5 years, and that saves, you can read it right there, close to $300,000. You'll see severe and moderate and minor injury. Those are specific guidelines given to us by ODOT. So severe is, of course, we don't want Class A injuries. And you can see how much we could decrease from 11 to 7.5 every 5 years. I mean, that's big to me. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of safety. And then getting to the moderate C's, B's, you can see the numbers. I don't really need to read it to you. And you can see how the numbers keep coming down, and property damage. Also, I'm really concerned right now as part of the Transportation Commission, because this year, 2020, we just finished, is the highest year we've ever had a percentage of our accidents involving bicycles and pedestrians. We've gone from an average of 14% per year to 17%. That 3% increase is not marginal, it's pretty large. So for me, dropping it by 5 miles an hour would be even a bigger safety impact and long-term health impacts as well. So there's my 3 slides. Gary, do you want me to say anything else, or do you want to turn it over to Brian?
No, I think I would just add that I think it's important to note that given that automobile travel accounts for roughly 90% of all travel in the city, that most of these benefits, the reduction in particularly severe, moderate, and minor injury collisions and property damage in particular, will yield benefits to auto drivers. Yes, as Mark said, it will likely reduce the severe injuries and death associated with pedestrians and bicyclists, but these benefits are distributed throughout the community, independent of which mode of travel one might use. Brian, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, next slide, please.
Hello, all. I'm Brian Soul. I'm on the Conservation and Climate Outreach Commission, and I've been working with Gary and Mark on this project. They've done most of the work. In addition to savings related to decreased incidences of trauma and property damage from decreased crashes at a lower speed, there would be savings in fuel savings. And this is because multiple studies in a variety of different sized communities have shown that with a decrease in the speed limit of about 5 miles per hour, you see a decrease that's concomitant in about 5% of the vehicle miles driven in that community, as people feel safer to venture out into the street walking and biking. Now, some of those savings in some communities, it's a little hard to say that there hasn't been a contribution to increased infrastructure, such as better sidewalks and protected bike lanes. But in general, from a variety of studies, you can assume about a 5% decrease in vehicle miles traveled should occur if Ashland is similar to other communities. And this would lead to about a $300,000 fuel savings annually in Ashland, because we'd save about 120,000 gallons of fuel in the entire community. Next slide, please. There'd also be savings because similarly, with the 5% savings in vehicle miles traveled within the community, we would see a decrease in carbon emissions. And this savings in carbon emissions and saving in fuel spending really is a result of simply the decrease in vehicle miles traveled. You can't really make a good case for the cost per car going down. There's some savings with decreased need to accelerate up to a higher speed, but a lot of cars are more efficient at a higher speed than 20 miles per hour. So those two things seem to balance each other out. So the savings in gallons saved and in carbon emissions really comes from decreased miles traveled. And so the social cost in Ashland's community's decreased carbon output as a contribution to the world decreased carbon output and trying to stave off climate change is estimated to be about $133,000 annually. I mean, you can see how that math was arrived at, those figures. And what's important is that as part of the SEEP plan, this could be a very significant carbon savings. For instance, it's predicted that this savings would be about the same as a 12% take up in Ashland households of changing your hot water heater from natural gas to electricity, or about 10% of Ashland households changing from natural gas to electricity to heat their homes. But it would be at a much greater financial savings than those projects would be. And next slide.
Hey, Brian, a question?
Yes, Ray.
Is the 5%, is that people that are going to change their mode of transportation?
Well, change their mode of transportation from a carbon spewing or electricity requiring vehicle to walking or biking.
Okay, that's what thought you were assuming. All right.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't make that clear. And then the next slide, which is very difficult to quantitate, is the social and health savings as people walk and bike more. The health benefits from cardiovascular health and decreased obesity and diabetes rates. And that's very, I think, difficult to, give a quantitative number, but surely there's a qualitative life improvement, health improvement savings by getting out and, walking from downtown to the theater instead of driving and parking. So in the next slide, so when you sum up the savings, it would be about 1.2 million annually to our community. The greatest savings would come from decreased trauma and property damage because of a decreased incidence in car wrecks. And one thing to remember is that if you get in a car, if you're a pedestrian or a biker and you're hit at 25 miles an hour versus 20 miles an hour, it's not a linear difference in the damage. It's an exponential damage as rates go up, as speed goes up or down. So it's a very important savings, which doesn't seem like a lot with just a 5 mile an hour change. So the trauma and property damage savings would be the greatest at about a little over $750,000. The savings on fuel would be about $300,000, and the estimate of social costs and a decreased carbon tonnage in terms of a footprint would be about $133,000 annually. So about $1.2 million annually would be saved by the community. What would it cost to put this system in? That's a good question. The signage costs for Portland were around $300,000 to put in different speed limits in their neighborhoods. And if you extrapolate that to the number of miles Ashland has compared to Portland, it would be about $18,000. But actually, our cost would probably be significantly more than that because we have such a higher percentage of our total miles in residential areas. And so we would kind of need more signs per mile, so to speak. So it's estimated that it may cost about $100,000 as a one-time expenditure. And then there would be additional costs that would have to be figured in. The system of decreasing the speed limits doesn't work unless there's some mechanism of enforcement, which would either be electronic with cameras taking pictures of license plates, or another FTE in the police department to sit on a motorcycle. And there may be infrastructure costs such as better sidewalks and protected bike lanes, but there would overall be a very significant cost savings to the community if we were to adopt this. But I think the big emphasis really should be on savings. And also, I think there would be good steps towards reducing our carbon footprint, as we're committed to do with the SEEP that was adopted a few years ago.
Brian, I have a question. So I get that why there may be some additional expenditure for sidewalks, improved sidewalks and things like that, but I don't understand why this should involve greater expenditures on enforcement than enforcing the existing 25 mile per hour speed limit. Seems like there's already an expenditure on that. I'm not sure why Ashland Police would have to increase its enforcement activity to just by enforcing a different speed limit.
Well, I guess your point's well taken. I guess I would argue that they're not enforcing the speed limit as they are, and so you're not going to. I mean, I can just give you the story of the street I live on, but there's not going to be a benefit if there's not enforcement.
Okay.
Next slide, please.
Ray, did you have a question for me?
Well, just to follow up to that, I mean, from a practical standpoint, we know people drive faster than the posted speed limit. I guess out of this, it's hard to say what the average will be, but we're expecting it should be lower with lower speed limit signs.
Yeah, my guess would be if people are driving a speed of X plus 5, speed limit X plus 5. If the speed limit's changed to Y, they'll probably drive speed limit Y plus 5.
But I would think in the beginning, at least, you would need some more focus on enforcement to get people to accept it.
And perhaps some cost of education to the community too.
Right.
Yeah, I think this discussion points to the fact that reducing the speeds is one part of a much more complex and more comprehensive approach to making the transportation system safe for all modes. And it will undoubtedly evolve and change over time, but this is really the first and I think most prudent step to take. Next slide, please.
And one other thing is Portland has adopted this, and I do think that, in summary, it's an inexpensive way to improve the safety to our citizens, especially our senior citizens, and to have a cheap way of reducing our carbon footprint.
Well,
So
when you say Portland has adopted it, my understanding is the default speed limit went down, but that their arterials which are posted separately, have not. Is that the case?
That is true. We're operating as the city of Ashland under a statute that's 810.180, which provides the same general authority as Portland has, albeit slightly differently. That statute provides for the city to petition ODOT to reduce speeds on arterial streets, those that are higher volume. But in all likelihood, this effort will focus on residential streets that are currently posted at 25 and reduce those speeds to 20. That constitutes a substantial, the majority of the city's transportation system. You can each probably itemize the arterial streets in town. Those are the state highways generally. And the rest of the streets are either collector or local streets. And those are the ones that will be, in all likelihood, the first tier of reductions. I included this graphic in the CPC's packet and just wanted to take a moment here to emphasize why it's important that we shift modes to the degree that it is possible to those that have the lowest carbon intensity. And you can see that each automobile mode, depending upon the size or power plant of the vehicle, can vary quite widely, but e-bikes and pedal bikes are down at the bottom of this graphic for a good reason. So to the degree that we can shift people from driving to walking or bicycling, we can have a substantial impact on our total transportation carbon output. Next slide, please. So the work group put together a motion that you also had included in your packet that basically asked the city council to direct the Public Works Department to begin to pursue lower speeds to the degree that's permitted by law, and also to ask the Southern Oregon legislative delegation to include Ashland among those jurisdictions that have more flexibility under a new House bill that will likely be introduced this coming session. And with that, that's the end of our presentation. Are there other questions that we can answer? Thank you, Elizabeth.
Tanya?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Has there been any assessment of the impact of reducing speed limits on, motorized scooters and e-bikes as well? Because it seems like that vehicle speeds might be impacting people's willingness to get on those types of transportation as well as pedal bikes and walking.
Would you restate the question? I'm not clear.
So the assessment that you've given us talks about the financial impacts around bicycling and walking, right?
Mhm.
But e-bikes and electric scooters and those sorts of things also, I think, are impacted heavily by what kind of environment the driver is in, right? So if they have big SUVs and things, people tend to be more nervous. Is there information available about potentially the impact of that as well as sort of the standard walking and biking?
I think all the micro mobility forms of transportation, that includes the electric scooter, the skateboard, the electric skateboard, bicycling, walking, all those modes really, I believe, will respond similarly to safety. People, at least from what I've read over the years, respond favorably to having separation from automobiles because there's a distinct threat to their health, safety, and life given their proximity. So to the degree that we can either slow the speeds down, so if they are struck, their injuries are much reduced, or those accidents are totally avoided because the operator of the automobile is driving at a slower speed. All those things combine to create a safer environment for people to be able to more readily choose to bike, skateboard, or ride an e-bike or a scooter.
I think there could be a greater savings in terms of decreased trauma, as many of the studies have come out of Europe. And those of you who've been in European cities know that the type of cars driven in Europe is very different than in America. So where you get a 30 or 40% decrease in quote unquote costs associated with trauma out of a European study, when you're looking at a high percentage of US vehicles being SUVs and trucks, you may have an even greater savings.
Jeff?
My understanding based on the conversation is this gets rolled out first on residential streets like say Mountain or Scenic, streets like that. Those are also, or at least some of these streets would also lend themselves to speed bumps. Did you guys evaluate the impact of speed bumps versus, or in combination with a lower speed limit?
I will address that one from the Transportation Commission, if I may. Speed bumps actually are a detriment, believe it or not. We actually have studies that show that actually speed bumps increase CO2 emissions and noise pollution. So we're not really, as far as Transportation Commission, myself personally speaking, we are not trying to get speed bumps for traffic calming measures. If we lower the speed limit to 20 in residential streets, it does two things. Because we could already do that right now, the city of Ashland. We could go through and start petitioning every street to be 20 miles an hour that's residential, but they'd have to become bike lanes, just like B Street. B Street's 20 miles an hour all the way down because it's a bike lane. So if you look at some of the other streets we have been looking at, that would be residential streets, and we could get them down, because most of the ones that are asking for traffic calming, so if you guys can file a petition and stuff like that, but the 85 percentile, what people are driving is about 3 to 4 miles an hour over the speed limit. So if we can drop that down, that would be huge savings as well. And to Tanya's point real quick, I'd like to make something that the state of Oregon classifies a bicycle if it can be powered up to 20 miles an hour. If a bicycle can be powered over 20 miles an hour under its own power, it is no longer a bicycle. So just so you know that. So 20 miles an hour make it even better, because then we have our bicyclists and our cars and our pedestrians all feeling safe going the same speed.
Jeff, I'd like to just respond to that question. The Transportation Commission and the three of us collectively see traffic calming, which speed bumps are one of many strategies that are utilized in that endeavor, to be a part of this total kind of approach, comprehensive approach to making bicycles and pedestrians a more viable mode of transportation. So yes, I can say that will be a part of what happens going forward insofar as it helps to achieve our objective of making the street system safer for all users.
Thanks.
Ray?
I'm all for lowering the speed limits. I do, though, education was mentioned. So I do think that needs to be part of this because I don't want to get into the position where I'm biking and now people are even madder at me because they got to go slower. It happens out there. But definitely increasing the safety and saving greenhouse gases, those are great goals. But again, I'd like to see some education. And I think we need, part of that education needs to be how we roll it out, residential versus arterial. And then the last thing is, I assume we're going to still be working on trying to get additional bike lanes as we go forward. This is kind of a first step in our overall safety plan. And I think there's some areas of town that need at least just a painted crosswalk to improve walkability, because most Oregon drivers are not aware that there's a virtual crosswalk where there's an intersection. And we've actually had people swerve and try to hit us as we're crossing Main Street near Manzanita or near Van Ness. So it would be nice to get at least a painted crosswalk. Drivers do pay attention to that. And I'm hoping that's not too costly.
The broader infrastructure questions that you allude to will be considered as a part of the transportation system plan update. So that we can look forward to in the coming year, or at least that's my understanding of the timing for the start of that endeavor. But my expectation is we will revisit the city's capital improvement program in terms of all modes, including bicycles and pedestrians.
Gary, I would also add that some cities put in these little mini roundabouts in residential intersections with flowers and trees and so on. And I think that also, it slows traffic down, but it also improves the livability of those communities.
Good point.
So I'm trying to stay focused. I think the safety goal of this is undeniable, and the quality of life and all that. But those all seem like they'd be more properly driven by the Transportation Commission rather than the Climate Policy Commission. So I'm trying to stay focused on the climate impacts and the cost. When you talk about 5% vehicle miles traveled reduced, does that presume all the different ways of getting this thing to actually work? In other words, it's not just posting new speed limit signs?
Actually, the studies that we drew upon showed some variation based upon enforcement levels, as I recall. So it is, again, this total package of enforcement, infrastructure, speeds, education, all those things combine, and trying to ferret out which has what effect is problematic to my perspective. But clearly having a regulatory requirement that basically we all live by is a first good step. I'd like to return to Ray's comment about education. I think there too, we need to see what the Conservation and Climate Outreach Commission can do and whether they can incorporate this strategy as a part of their ongoing projects. They've got a huge, long list of things to do. I wish them luck as I do us.
Okay, but I'm not sure that I fully understood the answer to my question. Is it the case that the 5% reduction relies on all of the methods of getting people to slow down to be implemented? In other words, $100,000 for new signs is a down payment.
the amount, the extent of enforcement, to my recollection, wasn't explicitly itemized. That is to say, I don't have the information to answer your question in its entirety. We know that without lower speed limits, enforcement's not going to drive speeds down to 20 miles an hour, which are essential for bicyclists and pedestrian safety to in fact increase. And without increased bicycle and pedestrian safety, we aren't going to see that shift in mode. So clearly there are a multitude of factors involved, but reducing the legal speed limit is paramount to even considering the others.
Yeah, Brian?
I'm just going to read this one paragraph from the bigger report. A separate analysis of traffic volume responses, which would be vehicle miles traveled, to the implementation of 20-mile-per-hour speed limits found that net system traffic volumes decreased in the range of 5.3 to 13.4%, depending upon particulars of the implementation in various communities, such as the extent of 20-mile-per-hour speed limit deployment, such as system-wide, which gave the greatest benefits versus only in certain zones, enforcement levels, and other contemporaneous traffic calming measures. And then in another part of the paragraph, it says it was hard to ferret out exactly what contribution decreasing the speed as opposed to implementing or infrastructure improvements such as sidewalks and protected bike lanes made. So that 5% is kind of across a bunch of studies, but they have very differing results because different communities have done it differently.
Okay. Another question that I have is putting up the speed limit signs is something that can be done relatively rapidly once the decision is made to do so. But it wasn't clear to me over what time frame all the other aspects of getting people to actually slow down could be rolled out, so that, you know, how long it takes to get to this 5% influences how much greenhouse gas you save, particularly in the context of vehicle electrification, because the presumption of 25 miles per gallon is perhaps not true even now in Ashland, because it's been adopting electrical vehicles at a higher rate than the rest of the nation. And certainly over the next 10 years, there's going to be quite a bit of EV adoption nationwide, and I would guess particularly in Ashland. So that's why I'm asking, because I'm trying to understand what the climate impact is going to be.
Understandable. I think it's equally important to acknowledge the number of large trucks and SUVs that are also present in the fleet that we experience on an ongoing basis. So while yes, we have some vehicles that are going to have little carbon impact, but yet still 3 times that of a bicycle, we're also going to continue to see large trucks and SUVs being a part of the mix. In terms of when this will happen, I believe that is largely the responsibility of the Transportation Commission working with the Public Works Department to determine, presuming that the City Council endorses this idea. Our first step here is to advance this to the City Council so that it can get its proper policy consideration, and at that juncture then dive into the more detailed issues of how, when, and where. As you may have noticed when you read the report, there is no specific listing of streets or map showing where this would be done. Those are all things that again, the Transportation Commission working with the Public Works Department, again, with the blessing of the City Council, will determine going forward. And the timing of that is unknown.
Yeah, I wasn't really asking what would happen going forward in Ashland. I was asking what the experience was in other communities.
Brian, did you see that?
I didn't see that exactly, sorry.
Okay, well, I think that'd be something interesting to know.
In Portland, the results were thought the reduction or the increase in bicyclists, which presumably is a reasonable measure of the reduction in vehicle travel, motor vehicle travel, happened within the same year as the reduction occurred. So the reduction occurred in 2018, and the data that was collected showed substantial increases. Again, I don't recall the number, but above 5% in terms of bicycle travel. So I would say, in response to your question, that the response can be very quick, again, depending upon where and how extensive the change occurs. You've got a couple of questions, Rick. People with their hands up.
So I just was going to make one additional comment. It seems like this is a pathway that is very easy to walk down. You know, like there's lots of pathways that we have considered for trying to do something about climate change, which are extremely complicated and require numerous different moving parts to all work together. This one, all you have to do is have one commitment to one change in signs. From then on, you can apply greater and greater enforcement to the process, but it's a very clear pathway to a very to multiple beneficial effects. And I mean, it seems like this is something that I think we would be foolish not to take this up.
Is that a motion?
I move to direct the Public Works. I'll make a motion for this. Tanya, do you have?
Well, hang on. If we're going to deliberate to a motion, then I want to restrict this to being just the members of CPC. If there are any questions of fact or history, then that's fine to have other people involved in that. But if we're going to debate policy, we need to be limiting who's participating in this process. So before we go into that, Mark, you raised your hand.
Yeah, in the middle of this meeting, we just got our transportation packet and our final numbers for last year. I gave you wrong information. I said the traffic accidents involving pedestrians last year was 17%. Well, the final number ended up being 18.7%. So that's the highest number ever in the city's history. Our city's average is 14, just so we're aware of that.
Okay. Stu?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Generally, I think there's some good merits to this proposal, but did you folks have a chance to engage with not just Public Works, but also Ashland Police, Fire and Rescue to talk about implications for their daily business?
Yes, Stu, I have been talking with Officer McLennan and the Ashland Police Department. Linda Peterson Adams also has the request to meet with the Chief Ty. So back to one of the things on enforcement and education, Officer McLennan said that he did not see any problems of lowering the speed limits in residential areas. He did see that he anticipates it could cause traffic issues on main streets like Siskiyou and those that are the county arterials. But you have the number one traffic officer who's behind it for the residential areas right off the bat. So we are engaging the police and fire and everybody else like that. So thank you for asking that question, Stu.
Okay, and the other issue is it's now 5 o'clock and there are a number of other agenda items that we have to get to. My expectation is that it's going to take a significant amount of time to actually put together a recommendation and decide how the thing's going to go forward through staff and the other commissions. So I don't
see it though.
Out of order. I'm in the middle of speaking, please. And so My recommendation to CPC is that we come back to this next month. Now, what I'd like to do is to go around just the CPC members and see what you wish to do at this point. So I'll just start naming names and going around. Julian?
So I'd like to make a motion and vote on it in this session. I think we can do that quickly, and I think that we've basically answered all the questions that are pertinent to the motion.
Ray?
Do you want to have a show of hands to support that?
I didn't, the motion's not in order. I asked a question about how we're going to go forward. And what I heard you say is you want to go ahead and consider a motion, even though we are out of time for this topic. And so I want to go around and ask each individual commissioner what they want to do. Ray?
That's what I want to do.
Okay, I'm in favor of this. I would like to see some more information on the education and the rollout, how it's going to happen and whether it's going to affect arterials or not.
Okay, does that mean that you don't want to entertain and deliberate towards a motion tonight, but rather at the next meeting?
I'm okay either way, because I'm assuming even if we pass it, that work's going to be ongoing anyway. It still has to go before council. They'll have questions, etc. So.
Okay, Bob?
Yeah, I'm in the same place. It seems to me that there are details that can be worked out, but they seem to be, not fundamental issues that would raise an obstacle to considering a motion on this at this time. I'm ready to consider a motion on this at this meeting or next meeting if we have to postpone it because of lack of time. But it doesn't seem to be necessary to do that.
Okay, but what's on the table right now is whether we're going to defer the rest of the agenda and potentially not get to it. And so you gave me kind of an ambiguous answer.
I don't think I was ambiguous at all. I said I'm ready to consider a motion.
Okay, thank you. Jeff?
I think I'm ready to consider a motion on the reduction of the speed limit. The second thing in Gary's memo was a request, the legislative delegation to take action, and we have not discussed that at all.
Okay, Tanya?
I'm ready to consider a motion, but I have some similar questions about the timing between those two elements. If we have to protect the city's ability to do that through the legislature, we might be a little preemptive. It might be preemptive in terms of the asking the council.
Chris?
I'm in favor of considering motion.
Okay, I think I've touched on everybody. Obviously, there's consensus for that. Julian, I think you were ready to propose a motion.
I move to direct the Public Works Department to pursue reducing maximum speeds within the city to the maximum extent allowed by Oregon Revised Statutes 810.180, with the goal of achieving 20, or with the idea that we will be aiming for 20 miles per hour throughout the city.
Is there a second?
I don't see that in the first statement, Julian, the 20 part.
It's, yeah, well, it isn't there, but isn't that the goal that we have? And the motion is that's my motion. If you'd like to amend it, by all means.
Well, I haven't seen a second yet.
I'll second it.
Okay. Further discussion?
I guess I would amend that motion to just do the first, move forward with the first bullet on the recommendations to council that Gary put to us.
I agree.
Okay, so are we considering an amendment to the motion?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all in favor of the amendment? Okay, so is there any further discussion on the motion that's on the table? Stu?
I just wanted to clarify that the motion presented is actually what was in the packet, because I think Julian just said direct public works, but in the packet it says recommend that the city council direct public works. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Pardon me, let me amend my motion. I move to direct city council to direct the Public Works Department to pursue reducing maximum speeds within the city to the maximum extent allowed by Oregon Revised Statute 810.180.
Tanya?
Just a question around whether that first direct should be recommend or request. I think Julian said to direct council.
I'm happy to recommend instead.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? The chair votes no. But it obviously carries. Okay. I think we're done with that agenda item. Is that correct?
I think there was an interest in discussing the second part of that related to new legislative authority that the council might ask the Southern Oregon legislative delegation to talk about. So maybe we can talk about that more next month.
Agree.
Okay. So what I heard is that we're ready to move on to the next agenda item. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you all. The next thing is carbon note. Gary, you're on for that too.
Yeah, so as the packet describes what transpired, I think it makes sense for us to just work with and through the administrative officials to try to figure out how to make this carbon note work. I think it's important for us to be kept in the loop and apprised on an ongoing basis what progress is being made. But at this juncture, what I would encourage the CPC to do is to pass a motion asking Adam Hanks to report to us every 3 months on the status of the carbon note and its approval and integration into the city's municipal code.
Ray?
Stu, do you have any feedback on that? I do agree with Gary, us deferring it to Adam to work it in as he can. I'm just not sure if we want to hold them to every 3 months or what is reasonable. Is that a reasonable request, I guess, Stu?
Well, I don't think it's not reasonable, but I think in the interest of keeping staff load efficient, maybe it would be best to have Tanya report back since she's on the council and maybe could report from that angle, and we could also get an occasional update from Adam. I don't know if that makes more sense or is more efficient use of time, but I think there also could be some procedural changes once a final city manager is hired. So that may be another opportunity to revisit this topic, if not before.
The one thing that I would just add to that is that right now we should remember that we are down in terms of administrative staff. So we should have a city manager and an assistant city manager, and we haven't had that for since last April. So, and we're not going to have it for at least 6 to 8 or 9 more months. So I think it makes sense to not try to add anything to that administrative team at the moment. And I'm happy to report back on whatever it is that this commission needs from me. I just need it to be clear what kind of information you're looking for. And then as Stu says, you might take it up again later once we have more capacity in that team.
So if we have more detailed comments on this, should we talk to Gary or Stu offline?
You can talk to me.
Okay.
Or Gary, or
Yeah,
we can have
I
trio
think,
call.
my purpose in bringing this is to make sure that we're moving forward on it, whatever that takes and whatever form that takes is immaterial. ultimately, I think we all want the city council and their decisions to reflect an acknowledgement of the impact of our decisions on our carbon footprint. So
I guess I would just add, like, feel free to check in with me or Adam at any time by email. If there's a question about whether there's been a change or where we're at with that. It's an important topic and we need to keep coming back to it, but we'll probably know more once the new council is more settled and we have, you know, the city manager question figured out.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that the consensus is to not move forward with this at this time, and to not put forward a motion or entertain having somebody or having Adam report back to us at any specific time period. Is that right? Gary, I can't hear you.
pardon me. How about if I just track this and I'll coordinate with Adam as an as needed basis and Stu, what have you. That'll work for me.
Okay, so Ray?
Yeah, again, I think the important thing is Gary worked out with Adam that this should be handled with staff to come back with how they could best implement it with the amount of people and workload they have.
Done.
Okay. Now I want to, I think, remind everybody that the carbon note was part of our communication to council. The work on drafting that communication did not happen due to other items that took priority. The reason what we're trying to push this through in January is so that we could get in front of council with budget recommendations, and that hasn't come together as yet. And so communicating to council is currently pending the budget recommendation that I think Bob and Stu are working on. Is that right? Chris? No? Bob or Stu, do you want to comment on that?
So you were asking about the budget recommendation?
Yes.
Yeah, I've been working with Adam a little bit on that. Bob and I had touched base on it, but we don't have really anything prepared as far as like, you know, anything that we're going to send to council or anything like that. But we did work out some of the specifics for the energy retrofit program that was more related to that project particularly.
Okay, so anyway, I just want to keep everybody apprised of where we're at on the council communication. Okay, I think we're done with 5.5. Is that right, Gary? Okay. Let's move on to 6.1, the SEEP update. In the packet, there was a document about this, and at the beginning of it, there is a set of 3 decisions that are being asked of the commission tonight. I don't propose to just read through these things. I'm assuming everybody's had a chance to review it. And so what I'd rather do is just open the floor to comment about the document as a whole or the decisions specifically. Hey, Gary? I can't hear you.
Clearly, the foundational document.
I can't hear anybody now.
It looks like Gary froze up.
Let's see. How about now? Listen, am I there?
It's very jerky.
Okay, go, I'll catch up.
Okay, is there comment from somebody else? Jeff?
Rick, I generally like the approach you propose of a hybrid approach rather than trying to update the entire SEEP. So that may mean going in and changing a few sections here or paragraphs here and there in the SEEP, but the main work could get done in a technical appendix as you suggested. So I do like that approach.
Okay, the word hybrid was used in how to integrate it with the comp plan. And so the higher level question, I think, is there was 3 possibilities that were laid out. And so I'm not sure exactly which one you're referring to.
So what is your preferred approach?
Well, okay, let me just go ahead and cite the 3 possibilities. One is to have a climate plan technical document as part of the energy, air, water comp plan element 11. This is what I'm suggesting is the preferred approach. Another approach is to modify the original document, in other words, the SEEP, which is quite long. And finally, another approach is to rewrite and replace the SEEP, which I'm not advocating, as that would be an enormous amount of work.
Number one.
I'm sorry?
Number one, your first approach, your preferred approach is good. Would support that.
Okay. Ray?
So when I read one, I kind of understood how we would update the comp plan, but I didn't quite understand then what we would do with the SEEP.
Well, I think the proposal is to basically leave it as it is. That this would be something that's layered over the top of the existing SEEP and be working within the approval that it received from council, and to take this much reduced document as how CPC plans to go forward with the existing SEEP.
Well, I like that the details of how we undertake the SEEP actions ends up in our comprehensive plan. But I'm a little worried about what the SEEP would be then. Would the SEEP then just be a sort of a time-stamped report that we started this off with, and it never gets updated, and the updates happen in master plan and comp plans? Or at some point do we go back and look at adjusting the SEEP, such as goals and or carbon goals or et cetera? I mean, we don't have to answer that now. We can try to at least try to get the actions into our city plans, including the comp. But I just was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Well, as you can tell, because I'm kind of struggling with this, I hadn't really thought it through to that point. My thought was that the existing SEEP would stand in place as it is right now, but you're right, eventually we're going to have to deal with whatever it says that becomes highly at variance with reality.
Okay.
My hope would be that the implementation plan, I mean, the SEEP as it's written is very wide ranging and very aspirational. And so it's hard for me to imagine that whatever we were to write in here wouldn't be supported by the SEEP. I doubt there'd be any major direct conflict with the existing SEEP. So that would be my take on it. Bob?
So I'm just wanting to draw attention to the fact that the SEEP is actually then enshrined in city ordinance. Then there's a specific reference in the city ordinance that commits the city council to have it as a goal, the achievement of two different things, both the achievement of the SEEP's goals in city operations and to also work to help ensure that all community facilities also achieve SEEP goals. So I want to make sure that if there's any change to the SEEP goals, it has to be that the ordinance refers to a specific document. approved city council documents. You got to make sure that that itself, gets reflected. So if we're going to keep, I'm happy, I'm okay with keeping the SEEP as it is, keeping the document as it is, not rewriting it. But if there's any changes to goals, they have to be reflected in something that the city council approves in order for the ordinance still to be in effect. You're muted. Rick, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know how that happened. Looks like, anyway. I agree with what you're saying, Bob. And what I'm hearing is that if the SEEP, let's see, what do we decide to call it? The climate plan technical document that would end up in the comp plan. If it gets to the point where it is actually in conflict with the existing SEEP, then we'll also have to revise the ordinance. And I agree that that would need to be done. Stu?
Yeah, I think and it took me a little while to wrap my head around the implications of doing it this way, but I think we'll be okay. We have the existing SEEP, it's approved. We don't necessarily need to modify anything in its long-term goals at this point in time. I mean, we could, but that would probably be a very involved process that I think we're trying to avoid right now. We would be concurrently, we have the existing SEEP, we would be concurrently like updating part of the comp plan and also creating this technical document, both of which point to the SEEP and to the ordinance as necessary. So really, I think the technical document is going to look like our short-term implementation update. And the head and shoulders of the SEEP will remain the same and get transported into the comp plan. Is that right, Rick? Is that tracking with your?
Yes, that makes sense.
Okay. So, I don't think we lose much. The major departure would be that we're reprioritizing actions, adding new ones that are more relevant. And at some point, yes, we'll have to go back and tidy up what is called the action plan. And that will probably be a bigger process. So, all right, just my thoughts.
Jillian, I think you had your hand up next.
So if I understand correctly, we're going to be writing what is effectively an addendum, which is a much briefer implementation plan or list of goals that's a lot more succinct than the original SEEP. And the original SEEP is just going to remain as it is in a separate place. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Good.
Tanya?
Yeah, so I have a question about the comprehensive plan pieces. I spoke with Bill Molnar, and the planning department does not have plans to open up the different elements on a schedule. So some of those elements are quite old, other ones have been looked at pretty recently. But I guess my question is, if this commission's process is to create things that will update certain comprehensive plan elements, we should make sure that those comprehensive plan elements are planning to be opened by the city, because generally when they do that, they look at the whole element, right? So if it may be several years before they look at a particular element that we've written something for, that's not necessarily going to help us. And just as a reminder, the comp plan really is about land use. It's not necessarily, when we think of a comprehensive plan, it's easy to think of it like that's the whole plan for the city, but this is specific about land use. And so I would want to make sure that we know that the work that this commission does is going to somehow slot into a plan revision process underway at the city. And right now, from what my conversations with Bill Molnar, there isn't one of those underway.
Well, let me state my understanding and see if we need to mold things together here, or it's just we haven't synchronized our thinking yet. My understanding is that Bill Molnar in particular has committed to updating element 11 of the comp plan in 2022. And that is part of getting the electric strategic plan fit into the comp plan. And then as part of that, it will also bring this technical document into that same element of the comp plan. And then once that's done, this technical document is then part of the comp plan, but it will not have yet been rolled into all the other elements of the comp plan. And rather over time, and the time is indefinite, as you said, Tanya, but when those elements do come up for revision, at that point, this technical document can then be expanded into the other ones. Does that all make sense to you, Tanya?
Yeah, I think so. I just, I guess I would, in my thinking, I think that the implementation piece of those two elements, or not elements, I shouldn't use that word, of those two pieces, the implementation piece in my mind is the higher priority immediately, because we don't have as many opportunities to actually influence the comp plan at the moment.
I don't think I quite understood that, but Stu, do you want to?
Yeah, I think we agree, because that's why we have the technical document listed as number 1 and the comp plan listed as number 2. So I think there's recognition that the comp plan piece is going to take quite a while to get done. And I think our hope with the implementation piece is that we have something that's done much quicker, so that we can keep some direction to this group and know where we're going with the climate plan in the next 2 to 3 years. So that's my understanding.
Gary?
I worked in local land use planning for my entire career. And quite frankly, I'm confused by the language that's being used here, and certainly can't figure out where exactly we're going to with this. But I can tell you most assuredly that adoption of a technical document into the comprehensive plan has no impact whatsoever on the body of legislation that controls land use matters. So in terms of talking about integrating the energy plan into the comprehensive plan, it has to be fully integrated. That is reflected in the goals and the policies and the background document. It simply can't be adopted as a separate reference document. If it is the latter, then it serves no direct purpose in terms of forming a basis for land use regulation, which is what I think our goal is here, is to make sure that greenhouse gas emission considerations are incorporated into our land use decision-making process. So this may all be well and good, but the language is confusing to me, and I'm not sure where we'll wind up at the end of the day as it's currently written. I would also like to add that while I think the SEEP is a great document and it's of its own self, as you've said, Rick, it's an aspirational document, and that really doesn't help us very much as a commission to figure out what it is we should or could be doing to advance those goals that are included in the SEEP. I think if we can revisit at least some of those goals and policies and make them more measurable and more explicit, I think that will help us in terms of advancing our ultimate goal, which is to ultimately reduce our carbon emissions.
Okay, well, I think what I'm hearing is restating what I think is the essence of the rest of the outline for this document, that you're okay with that, but the way it gets incorporated into the comp plan is at least confusing to you. And I don't propose we try to resolve that tonight, but perhaps you and I could talk offline about that, because I've heard many different opinions from different people about that topic, and I'm still struggling for how we're going to come to consensus on this. Ray?
I just wanted to follow up with Gary to see if, because there was a mention of having this technical document amended to the comp plan, which Gary says won't do anything unless it's actually integrated into it. But I thought originally we were going to integrate it into chapter 11. So I just wanted to understand, is that the direction we're thinking, that it would get integrated, not just referenced by the comp plan?
Well, what I thought I heard Gary say, and Gary, correct me if I've got it wrong, is that not just chapter 11, a technical document part of element 11 is not the same as going all the way up to the top of the comp plan and revising the document at that level and then propagating all the changes down through all of the elements. Is that fair?
I think we've concluded that, as Tanya said, that that's not realistic, that the comp plan will be updated consistent with the schedule, and that schedule consistent with Bill Monroe's commitment is to do the energy element in the coming year. So that's the extent of the scope that we can address. My understanding is that the electric master plan or the energy master plan, as a part of the consultant's task, will be to create a document that can be actually adopted as a replacement or as a part of element 11. And in that way, our work on the energy master plan will be reflected in the comp plan and serve as a source of regulation for future land use actions, to the degree that energy is relevant to land use actions, which, as an aside, it's rarely utilized as it's written now. Not that we can't make it different, but at present, it's kind of one of the stepchilds of the comprehensive planning process. It really doesn't get much press. So we're going to have to be extraordinarily diligent in making sure that we add substantive policies, goals, and in fact, ordinance language to implement those policies and goals in order to actually influence and affect the land use planning process. It's not impossible.
Gary, you're breaking up again.
It's not sure what we've written here.
No, I can't hear you.
And
No.
We have to make sure we're starting from the right place, a part of the comp plan.
Gary, I think you and I should talk offline, because you're breaking up so much and it's a complicated topic to begin with. So I'd kind of like to move on past this.
Okay.
Tanya?
I wonder if these are actually two different things. When we talk about updating the SEEP, I wonder if the update to the SEEP is really this more detailed implementation plan, you know, along with any other sort of obvious changes that we think need to be made, you know, having learned from a couple years of implementation. But that this question of the element 11 is actually a planning process that this commission works within to integrate climate and the information from the SEEP into, just like we've been doing with master plans and other types of things. So I wonder if that might be helpful for us to think about these as kind of two distinct elements, as opposed to the comp plan question coming into the revision of the SEEP piece. Just a
Good
thought.
point.
So this technical document could be like an addendum to the SEEP.
The technical document, well, I get a little bit confused in terms of what we're talking about, because in some ways people are talking about a technical document to the comp plan, and in other ways people are referring to the technical document being essentially the implementation plan.
I think
So,
I'm talking about the content that Rick had in his note, right? That had 5 items with names, and is that what you were thinking, Rick, that this document would contain?
Well, I want to back up for a second. So I'm not going to directly address that question, Ray, sorry.
Okay.
What I'm hearing is that even though we haven't really gotten to it, that there's a reasonable consensus for doing a small implementation document, and how we deal with that document, whether it's a technical part of element 11 of the comp plan, or whether it's associated with the existing SEEP and how it goes with the ordinance. Those things haven't been thought through, and I don't propose we try to solve that problem as a committee tonight, but rather to come back later. And so instead of belaboring something that probably requires some thought before we start talking about it again, what I'd rather do is to press on to whether people are okay with the outline of the document as it is, even though we haven't quite resolved how it's going to get plugged into other things, and whether people can sign up to author the portions of it, or whether you want to throw this outline out entirely and propose something else, or what. I want to get a sense of where we are amongst the rest of the commissioners. Gary?
I think Tanya had a good idea, and that is, let's approach our efforts, one on the comp plan that will be accomplished through the master plan, and one on what it is we need to be doing that in essence supplements the SEEP in a way that it becomes more action oriented as contrasted to aspirational. Does that help in terms of our conversation and our organization?
Well, I think it's consistent with what I just said, which is that one way that this could go is an add-on to the existing SEEP, which is what I thought I heard you just say.
That'll work. And then over on the other side is this comp plan part that is distinct and different.
Well, I personally would need to think about whether that makes sense. And I was proposing not to try to address that tonight because I believe we need to think about it some more. Jeff?
Rick, perhaps you could talk to Bill Molnar and get back to us on, he should have some thoughts about how these pieces come together in implementation. I'd like to hear what he had to say.
Stu?
Yeah, planning has offered to facilitate our process when the time comes, but we're going to be doing most of the heavy lifting when it comes to writing any suggested new comp plan stuff that's related to climate. Most of the regular stuff that's in the comp plan is land use related. That would fall to them to come up with the content, but they're really just going to be our guide as we do the work. So they'll help facilitate our public engagement. They'll help us do the particulars of formatting and that kind of thing. But there's not going to be like partial FTE available to us or anything as we move through that process, at least not that I've heard. So we have their blessing, but sort of with conditions that we do a lot of the work. If that makes sense.
Okay, Ray?
There you go. Can we move on to what you had outlined in terms of what we should put in?
Well, that is what I'm proposing to do, rather than belabor it, exactly how this thing is going to integrate with other documents, because I would like some time to think about that.
Okay. Well, it sounded like, we're re-looking at goals, laying out timelines, how we measure those goals, and then you had mitigation, adaptation, and then maybe prioritization is the schedule of how we do this. I don't know, but
yes, that was the intent.
Basically, all that would add more detail to whatever actions we want to pursue during these years of the timeline. I mean, that sounds reasonable to me. it's a starting point, right?
Yes, and all I'm really asking is whether that top layer outline is acceptable, hopefully to a consensus of the commission. Julian, you had something to say?
Oh, the only thing I just was going to say is
Um,
you want to just vote on it.
I don't
do
know
you
that we need
approve?
a formal vote on this as long as there's a consensus. And so if I don't hear anybody objecting, I'm going to assume consensus. Because we're not taking any formal action here. This is a planning process for the commission. Okay, so but thank you for trying to formalize this a little more. If there's a general agreement to the broad outlines of this document, show me a thumbs up. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything from Gary, but he might be frozen.
No, I'm hoping that the discussion is focused on the part of your document that's headed content, which looks fine. That part is fine.
Yes,
It's
that is
the other
exactly what
part.
I'm asking about.
Okay, that's fine then.
Okay, so then the next question, there are proposed author commitments with the theory that by the next meeting, you'd have a page of material that fits within this outline. And so I'm not really asking the whole commission, but rather the individual authors that have been proposed, whether they're willing to commit to that or not. See, I saw Jeff and Tanya, Stu and I obviously have already committed to it.
I've got a question about this, Rick. When you say a page, by the next meeting, I'm thinking about the action items, but I'm also thinking, what is it that you're asking us to commit to as individuals? A page saying what exactly?
Taking your portion of this outline and putting your thoughts into what it means. And if you want to communicate with Stu and I, because obviously we thought more deeply about this than what's written on this piece of paper, that would be fine. So, Bob, actually, I think you're the only proposed author that I haven't heard from.
Okay, I'm fine. I can do that too.
Okay.
I think if I can interject, I think the focus of that one page would be identifying near-term actions and priority stuff we want to do, which I think has already been stated, but maybe that helps clarify.
Well, that will certainly be important to filling out the schedule. So that's got to be part of it. But obviously, there's also text that just says what this section means. Ray?
In terms of this one pager, I'm just wondering, you have, there's a timeline out to 2050. Like mitigation and adaptation, should we be looking at the next 5 years, or how far out are you thinking?
Well, if you look at outline bullet 541, where it says time resolution of 21, 25, 30, and 50, that's saying at each of those dates, there would be some description of what should happen by that date. And I want to contrast that with the way the SEEP did it. It talked about, I think, an 8% per year thing. And I find it very hard to plan to that kind of a glide slope, and particularly since we're already quite behind on it.
It's hard to plan and it's hard to measure.
Exactly. And so this is proposing that we take 4 discrete time points and make whatever plans we set up, and the near-term ones for what happens by the end of this year should be very concrete, as we move out in time, the 2050 one is going to probably just basically restate what SEEP has already said for a goal, because it's hard to be more than hand waving at this point for what happens in 2050, but to be much more concrete on those intermediate dates and be able to come up with a plan of here's how we're going to electrify transportation. Here's how we're going to electrify buildings. Here is how we're going to take carbon out of our electric supply or our gas supply. To be more concrete about those things as we march through those 4 discrete time period points in time.
Okay.
Okay, so I think I've heard commitments from all the authors, and if they feel like, at least at this point, they have some idea what they're supposed to go to, and they understand that Stu and I are certainly open to having conversations about that. I think it's fair that it needs to be an editor that's going to pull the whole thing together, and I think that person ought to be me at this point. And so I'm happy to have offline discussions with any of the authors, or if any of the other commissioners want to weigh in on this, please get a hold of me. Tanya?
Just a quick question. What are we thinking of in terms of community engagement around this plan? Are we expecting to do any sort of, engagement and feedback and that sort of thing, so that we can kind of check what the community thinks about these implementation plans?
I don't have an answer to that question right now. If you look at the work plan section down at the bottom, the 3rd bullet is communication plan, and that has to be sorted out as part of this.
I just wondering if we had any details on that yet, but it's in the works, it looks like. Okay.
Yeah, the intent was to come up with a very broad outline of what we're doing, and just being sure that the commission was in consensus about marching in that direction, because if it's not, I don't want all of us to be doing a bunch of work that we then throw away. Okay, I thought I saw a hand come up, but Julian?
Well, I don't know that this is, the reason I put down my hand was I'm not sure that this is pertinent to the current discussion, but there's a part of this in here that is mostly your and Stu's purview about natural gas use in Ashland. And I can tell you that I have at least some of that content worked out in a way that I think would make sense. And I can supply the whole thing sort of on block to you, which you've already seen, I think, 2 or 3 different times.
Yes, but if you wanted to take a look at it, because the situation constantly evolves, and review it and then send it to me again, that would be easier for me than to try to find it.
Sure, no, absolutely. I'm happy to resend it and get it updated for what we're doing now.
I'd
Julie?
like that as well.
Yeah, can you copy me as well?
Yeah,
Jeff and Ray. All right.
Okay, and Gary, I thought I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, I was, 2 things. One, Stu, do you think you could develop a template for the rest of us to kind of follow, so that we're all providing a reasonably consistent format, at least for the content that we're developing, so that it makes sense in the end? Or is that possible?
Well, I think having a template makes sense, but rather than tasking Stu with that, I think I'll take that action.
Great, be perfect. Also, I would really like to be engaged with the goals section.
Okay. I'm sure that Stu and I would be happy to have another body help us work that out.
Yeah, you could add me in there too.
Good.
Okay, we're getting close to a quorum, so.
Oh, okay. Well,
no, I'm not trying to dissuade you, Ray. I'm just.
yeah, I understand. have to remember that.
We're only up to 3 so far, so it would take 2 more to go over the edge.
Okay.
So that's fine. Anything else about this?
When
Gary?
did I am not conversant enough with this outline, but are we going to get a new updated inventory as part of this?
Probably not. Not right away anyway. You know, one of the things about the inventory is that it's not dynamic, and so it doesn't show much change year over year. It's not going to be a useful tool to inform prioritization more than what we already have on file.
But I'd like to comment on that too, Gary. There is the inventory that is done in a standardized fashion that works across many different levels of government and across lots of government entities at the same level. And I think that's what Stu is talking about. But what we're going to do as far as measuring things locally is definitely on the table, and Stu and I are going to be talking about that quite soon.
Okay. One of the big omissions that I have seen or believe exists in the inventory is what we're doing in the watershed. And I would suggest that we try to get a handle on that as a part of reviewing and updating the seat.
Yeah, well, we can maybe talk about that offline. There are a number of questions we need to answer about that.
No doubt.
Okay, so we're starting to run behind. I feel like we've come to a consensus of how we're going to move forward. And I'm sure that we all have questions about how this is actually going to work out, but I'd like to defer those because I'd like to get through the rest of the agenda. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. So the next thing on the agenda is the Energy Retrofit Loan Program. So Bob, you're up for that.
Okay, thank you, Rick. So this is just an interim note. Stu and Brigitte and Tanya and I worked on a proposal for a home energy retrofit loan program. But what we did first is we looked at what was the current situation here in Ashland and how is it working, and then what we found is that it was mostly, it's pretty successful, but it's a fairly limited program right now. We have quite a few incentives, cash incentives for people, for households, and they offer separate zero interest loan for households, but people are not able to get both of those at the same time. They can get one or the other because they're different targets. They're not, these programs have been budgeted in the last couple of for many biennia, but at the last 2 biennium at the level of $160,000 per biennium. That's $80,000 per year. That's in the electricity fund. They've been in the electricity fund, and there's been uptake, fair bit of uptake, but it's not huge, and it's not well advertised because frankly, there's not enough money to satisfy the demand if there were a big uptake. So after thinking about all this, what we decided is that rather than create a whole new home energy retrofit loan program, we would take advantage of the fact that there is something that already exists. It's a lot easier to tweak something that is already working rather than build something from scratch. So we prepared this interim document that provides just a few changes from the current program. That's what we put in the packet. I think there are essentially, well, we've summarized them as 4. Maybe there's, some of these items are 1A and 1B or something, but I think what we have suggested is focusing the eligible expenses for the home energy retrofit loan program more on electrification. But also continuing to support building envelope improvements that would improve energy efficiency. The loan program that's currently offered by the city is a zero interest loan program. It is a maximum of 5 a year. It is a 5-year term, and it is up to $7,500. So the direction we would like to go, and this needs to be discussed still with the finance department. That conversation has not yet been completed. I've been talking with Adam about it. Is increasing the maximum to 15,000, but charging an interest rate, charging 5% interest for that over a 10-year term. And then keeping the 5-year term on $7,500 loans and charging a 3% interest on that. There's currently, this is just a detail, there's currently a $50 recording fee. Rather than a $50 recording fee, we're suggesting a 1% front end fee, which is would be both. In either case, it's rolled into the loan amount. Currently, the $50 recording fee is rolled into the loan amount. If we replace that with a 1% front end fee, that would also be rolled into the loan amount. The point being that if somebody borrows $15,000, a 1% front end fee would be $150. It covers a little bit, so it tracks a little bit better with the cost of that administration. We are suggesting a difference here again with the other incentive programs. There are cash incentive programs, as I mentioned, and households cannot take both a cash incentive and a loan. We're suggesting expanding the program to allow low-income households to benefit from both the cash to reduce their cost of doing one of these retrofits, but also then cash doesn't help somebody that can't afford the cost on their own and needs financing. So providing that ability to reduce the cost and then spread it over a number of years for low income households. Other households could take advantage of one or the other. Non-low income households could continue to take advantage of either the cash incentive program, or the loan program, but not both. Then the fourth point that we outlined has to do with funding. We think it should continue to stay in the Extra City Fund. It's already been in there. We think it should be doubled from $160,000 per biennium to $320,000 in this next biennium. And we think that we would like to ask the CPC to recommend allocating $100,000 from the monetization of the clean fuel credits to this budget line as well. So that would be a total of $420,000 for the next biennium, rather than just $160,000, which is the current funding level. And then one of the additions here is, in order to try to recycle the resources more quickly, explore with the city the possibility of offering loan participations to local investors, so that the city could then re-lend that money in a much shorter period of time. Currently, when the money flows in, under the current program, when $160,000 or even $5,000 is loaned out, the city doesn't see that money except little by little as it's repaid. The city could offer loan participations, and this is a standard financial mechanism, to investors that could then take not buy the loan, but simply benefit from the cash flow that would be that they would be buying, and the city would continue to administer it as it is on bill financing, and then the local investor could take that cash flow, but the city would get an upfront payment from the investor for that, and therefore be able to recycle the money all over again. So it's just a way to speed up the recycling of these of the what's essentially a revolving fund. I want to not use the word revolving fund because it's not set up as a revolving fund, but that's essentially the concept. It's a bit complicated, but it's not actually that unusual a thing to do. So those are the four things that we were suggesting, trying to incorporate into the proposal. As I said, we've had conversations with current city staff that are administering the program, and also with Adam, informal conversations with him, but still need to do some more work. But before getting very deep into those discussions, wanted to make sure that the CPC would be on board with these kinds of changes, or if you are not comfortable with some of these changes, then we would just drop them and not bother discussing them with the city staff. So I guess with that, I'd like to entertain any questions. I don't know if Tanya or Stu or Bridget would like to add anything to what I said.
No, I think you did a good job of explaining it, Bob. I would just like to reiterate that there's a bunch of things we're still not sure about. So it'd be useful to hear feedback from anybody here. And I do see this as one of the most viable tools that we have to enable more residential investment. That doesn't directly come out of the city's budget, but we can allow the ratepayers to invest in their own upgrades and see a lot of emissions reductions from that. So yeah, I think this is a really valuable tool and we should keep exploring it, which Bob and I intend to do, and curious to hear what you think.
I have a number of questions, but let's get the other commissioners first. Ray?
The eligible expenses. So is this different, Bob, in that the current one's only building envelope, and et cetera, and you want to add, air conditioning and heat pumps and all that, control systems, et cetera?
I can take that. I think
Great, Stu.
the current program is mostly used for heating upgrades or occasionally for windows. And like Bob mentioned, in the past, we've had this as like an alternative to taking incentives. Not every customer can use the incentives. Some people could more use the loan. So in the past, this has been an effort to have sort of like a little bit of something for everybody. There is a question on the table about whether we can or should allow the loan concurrent with incentives. There's also an effort on my part to try to overhaul all the conservation incentives a little bit, make them a little more streamlined and easy to understand. So that could happen in parallel with this project. But yeah, it remains to be seen exactly what we would offer as a final program.
Okay. Yeah, my second part was on the incentives. So if a low income household met the criteria for getting the cash incentives as well as the loan, then would the cash apply to the loan so they take out a lower loan amount?
Yeah, or they would get a direct cash incentive like they do right now, and also pay back the loan. It could go either way, I think.
Okay.
Being able to provide both programs to income limited households is definitely a viable option, in my opinion.
And what happens if someone defaults on their loan?
I think in the history of the program, there's been 2 defaults, and one was resolved and one was kind of partially resolved. So it's pretty low exposure.
Okay.
And with these programs, the way it's set up, at least the way we're proposing it, there would be, the process would begin with the city inspection. It would end with the city inspection, and there would be, a pretty solid understanding of what the project scope is, I think. The city does do a recorded, it's not a lien exactly, but they do record against the property when someone takes out one of these loans. So if the house is sold, that's the point at which they can collect.
It's a note on the deed. There's a note added to the deed, and that gives the city the ability to pursue repayment if the household defaults. And as Stu said, there's only been 2 defaults in about 250 loans, and the city, and there were partial defaults, of course, and the city got partial payment. So it's a very low risk situation.
So you're addressing almost one of my questions, which is how is it even possible to run away from this debt? I don't understand how you can have any defaults.
Well, and it depends on the city's the city deciding that it wants to be understanding. So the city has every right to turn off the utility. The city has every right to collect upon the sale of the house. But if the household doesn't, if the homeowner doesn't sell the house, and then the city is somewhat reluctant to turn off the utility bill, so they try to work something out.
Okay, well, that sounds more like a forgiveness than a default to me, but I don't want to split hairs.
I
You're
gather
right.
that both of those defaults were during the 2009, 2010 housing crisis too. So other factors in play.
You're right, Rick. You're splitting hairs, but but you're absolutely correct. There was partial forgiveness.
A question on the funding going from 160 to 320. Where is that money coming from?
I think that's a wish list.
Well, I don't know. I think it has to, there has to be a look within the electricity fund and see the ability of the electricity fund to absorb it. There are funds in the electricity fund, and that's going to have to be the result of a prioritization within that fund. It's paid by ratepayers in the end. So that goes into the formula.
Tanya?
I would just add that because it's an enterprise fund, when we talk about having budget problems, we're talking about having problems in the general fund.
Mm-hmm.
The enterprise funds are managed in such a way and regulated in such a way that they have to maintain a certain amount of fiscal health. When you're dealing with water systems and electric systems and that sort of thing. With one of the things that I really like about this is that it's an investment. It's not so much an expense. So when you think about the budget of any department at the city, an expense that shows up in there is usually money that just goes out the door. What this does is it's a loan, and eventually that money will trickle back into the electric fund. And so as people pay their loans back, right? And so the interesting thing is that every fund has what is often called an ending fund balance. It's an amount of money that they're just sitting on, and often they're sitting, it's invested in the local government pool at the state level and that sort of thing, but it's not necessarily making the city a bunch of money anyway. And so there's a cushion within which I think we can really make this ask, because it's not being lost, it's not being expensed in that same way, it's being loaned. And it will come back onto the books over some period of time. So I think, given our fiscal restraints right now, I actually think that this is a great way to expand the program without having to make a budget ask that will be very difficult for the budget committee and the council to consider.
Stu?
Just to tack on to what you said, Tanya, I think one thing that we haven't discussed yet with this proposal is that because we're looking at electrification as a major means of reducing emissions, every time we do electrify something, we're also looking at future revenue for the utility, future kilowatt hour sales, and that doesn't hurt us financially. There's other considerations, but there's more to the investment besides just seeing the money come back in.
And to tack onto that too, there's also a 25% electricity tax that tax revenue goes into the general fund. So it's actually healthy for the city and healthy for the electricity fund.
Ray?
So they can only buy electrical, right? They're not going to buy a gas heat pump or a gas hot water heater or a gas stove to get this program?
That's correct. Stu, you want to take that?
Yeah, we would be focusing the loan eligible measures and also the incentives from the city. I think we want to sort of take a look at all of those programs and make sure that they're working to meet our climate goals. So yeah, there would be a lot of electrification. There's a place for gas efficiency, but I don't think that is really a piece of this program.
Right.
Well, and unless Avista pulls a rabbit out of the hat and starts providing appropriate gas through their lines that's not polluting the environment.
Well, I don't know where they're gonna find. Gary, you're muted.
Stu, following up, could we focus this program exclusively on emissions reductions in the form of reducing the incidence of gas water heaters and gas appliances generally, including central heating systems? Could we as a program focus it exclusively on that, recognizing that that's our goal. And kind of a follow-on question, does that make sense given the efficiencies that the BPA program provides in terms of insulation and those kinds of things?
Yeah, so, where this program initially came from was trying to provide an option for holistic residential retrofits. So people could really do a full package upgrade on their home, which normally they wouldn't have the cash to do. But to the extent that we focus this on, emissions reducing electrification measures, yes, I think we could focus it on just that. Historically, we've also done weatherization projects with this loan, and I wouldn't want to leave out, especially income limited households, from using this program for that type of thing, especially when we're talking about switching to more electric energy, because when you do that, you always need to, double check your efficiency. Otherwise, you end up paying a lot. So in the interest of having a balanced program, I think it's good to keep the weatherization measures in there, insulation and windows. But, as far as investment to the community goes, and as far as, pure electrification, we could limit it to that if we wanted to. And that's something I think
I'd like to expand on that. If it was focused on the goals of greenhouse gas reduction and cost savings, then it would sidestep making specific technology choices.
Yeah.
Ray? I can't hear you, Ray.
I think, Stu, what you're saying is households may have gas heating, but they want to just take part in the windows and insulation. So you didn't want to throw them out.
Yeah, that could be one element. I mean, making this sort of energy retrofit program available to people, I think has a nice benefit, because it means we're encouraging them to invest in their building envelope. And they may choose to do that or not. And, whether we want to limit that access because of their heating choice, I'm not prepared to make that decision today. But, generally I try to make the programs accessible to as many people as possible. So,
well, I would think if you want to put in a new heating system, we'd restrict it to electrical or hot water. But if you are just doing energy efficiency and not buying appliances or pumps, etc., you could still use the program.
Yeah, right now the draft eligible measures are all heat pump technology. So, I mean, as far as heating and cooling goes.
Okay, I saw a whole bunch of hands go up, and I'm not sure. It's just randomly picked on you.
Yeah, I think this is an important question, but I would be more inclined to try to make sure that that funding pot is large enough to accommodate both needs, or that it's recycling, as Bob was talking about, rather than trying to figure out how to restrict it. I don't think we necessarily need to figure that part out today, but I do want to call to the Commission's attention the budget process that we are heading into, and the fact that the staff will be coming forward to Council and to the Budget Committee with the draft budget at the end of March. And so I think if the electric department is amenable to this, and staff is, then we should be looking to get that conversation going sooner rather than later, so that this ask is in front of them and they could be thinking about how to incorporate it. We don't want to have to make this as a separate ask once the initial budget has been put forward.
So thank you, Tanya. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to get this before the commission today, even though we haven't built out all of the details, so that we could actually put it before you in its complete form in February, so that it's in the staff budget that goes to the Budget Commission. It's not an additional after that. It's already in the base budget.
Julian?
I guess my first question was, do we have time for additional discussion, or should we just vote on agreeing to go forward with this to make sure that it actually gets done before the council votes on the budget?
Well, my understanding is that we're in consensus on going forward with this. I haven't heard anybody object to it.
Okay, well, then I have a separate question then.
I'm sorry?
Then I have a separate question then.
Okay, please go ahead.
So this maybe is a question for Bob, but effectively this is kind of our utilities investing in its bottom line. And so I don't know if you did this analysis. I'm curious to know, did you try and figure out what the return on investment for an amount of capital that you're using would be? Meaning, like, you know, you're, and perhaps you've already done this, and maybe this is, anyway, it seems like if you were using, I don't know, $500,000 instead of $300,000 as the amount of capital you're working with, you might get you might get a faster or a worse return on your investment. I don't know if you did that analysis.
Stu has got his hand up because he started this analysis.
Well, you know, I don't think I can give you a specific answer to that, Julian, but it also depends on what kind of program delivery we end up doing. You know, not all electrification measures are going to create a lot of new revenue. Some will, some won't. But typically, if we look at something like an electric car or a heat pump water heater, we'd see something like that pay off, you know, simple payback of like 3 to 5 years or something like that. So, and that you have to also think about what are future electricity prices going to do. And, you know, that becomes a complicated analysis pretty quickly. But I feel confident that, you know, short-term repayment of electrification measures is feasible.
So is it possible to focus our incentives on those things that pay back most quickly?
It is, but you know, we'll be leaving some people out, and there may be equity concerns with that. There may not. I think it just depends on the goals of the program and what we hope to accomplish with the resources we set aside.
Are you done, Julian?
Yes, I'm done.
Gary?
Oh, I was just coming back to Tanya's comment about the unfunded budget balance, whatever. I'm blanking now on the term. But anyway, their carryover balance that the electric department uses that then subsequently is invested in the state's local government fund. If we were to match our interest rate with whatever the electric department is deriving from their investments in the local government investment fund, then it seems like we could have much more flexibility in terms of that amount of money. You know, is it possible if we were to set a program up where they were assured of getting the same basic return as would be available with the local investment fund? What difference does it make whether it's going into local homes or invested with the state?
So just a general observation on that, the local government investment pool is a state-run investment pool, and it is completely liquid. So the difference is it's completely liquid. This is not technically a liquid investment. It's invested at 5 years, 10 years. We can get some recycling if the city decides to go through a process of selling participations, but it's lumpy, and it's not something that you can just go and pull out, whereas the city can take its money out of the local government investment pool at will. So it's in a sense apples and oranges, but you're right in the way you're thinking about it, is that they should be able to accommodate this. But it's really a question for you know, the finance director to see about the city's management of its long-term and short-term assets.
Okay, we're running out of time. I have a number of small, I think, detailed questions that I think I'll just stick in an email and send to you folks,
okay,
rather than trying to do it at the meeting right now. Does anybody else want to speak to this agenda item before we move on? Ray?
So we're agreeing that we should move forward and look at this again in February.
That is my understanding, yes.
So
Okay, just wanted to clarify that.
What I think I heard is I heard no major objections to any of the features that we presented. There are some suggestions about, you know, ways to massage it, ways to refine it that we'll take into account and come back with, in addition to getting more feedback from the city and city staff to come with a full proposal in February. Thank you.
Yes, and well, the one question that I had that I don't know if it's that big of a question is whether rental properties can access this thing.
No. Currently,
Yeah.
they cannot. The way the program is currently structured, rental properties cannot. And not only that, how properties that are owner occupied and then convert to rentals are required to repay the loan immediately. That's the
Well,
current.
I'd like to understand what the justification is for that, because that might mean that landlords don't do the improvements. And so it's the tenants who are on the lower end of the income spectrum that actually get stuck paying the cost. So some verbiage about why it's that way would be helpful.
I think the short answer is that we can't put a note on the deed of the house without the owner being involved.
Well, I'm not suggesting you loan to the
To
renter.
the renter, and to the renter.
I'm suggesting you loan to the landlord, but it's
Yeah.
the renter that gets the benefit because their utility bills go down.
I don't think that's out of the question, but that's not currently within the scope of the program.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, because that's
Bob
the
and I
one
have
question I
talked
have
about
that might affect the direction of this thing in any significant way.
Yeah, it's on our radar. I think that'll be for a future version to address.
Yeah, my understanding is it's a lot more complicated with involving landlords and who gets the benefits of the program. But yeah, I'm totally with you in spirit on that idea. I think it should be available everywhere. But there are wrinkles that I think make it complicated.
I have no doubt there are wrinkles, but peeling the first layer of onion so that we can start understanding why that's not practical, I think would be helpful in selling this to the community.
Tanya, did you want to say something about it or no? Oh, I thought, no.
Okay, anything else for this agenda item? Okay, I don't see any.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Bob. And everybody else that worked on it. So the last agenda item, I believe, is looking at the topic tracking. I sent an email out asking for any updates to this. I didn't get anything back, but I want to have time for somebody that wants to just respond verbally to this thing. Both whether you're the right lead, whether the status is right, and when you might like some time and how much time you would like. Those are all the questions that are continuously on my mind.
For my part, I can say that we'll probably be bringing some website stuff to you folks next month, as well as probably asking for feedback on the clean fuels budgeting.
Rick, on the Avista feedback, you wanted to look at that in February, so I guess we'll have a draft. Jillian, if you can send me your thoughts on gas, and I'll draft something and send it out to you guys before the meeting to get some feedback.
Chris?
I see I'm on slate for February 11th, and that works for me. I've got some updates there, specifically as well to the housing committee that I'm a part of. We've had 2 meetings, and a lot of that has dealt with the solar setback issue in regards to density of housing and how that plays out. So I feel like those are concurrent issues with the residential construction standards I'm looking at here for PV reservation as well on a number of levels. So
Great.
So Rick, on the electric utility, I think we should be good for February to do an update. And depending on how much depth we want to go into, that could either be 10 or 20 minutes. And we probably should talk about that offline next week.
Right.
Okay. And Rick, okay.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, Rick. Well, I was going to, if you're going to respond to Jeff, I'll wait.
No. Go ahead, Bob.
I'm down for the building energy performance scores, and I've deferred that until I wanted to prioritize the home energy retrofit loan program because of the relationship to the budget. So that won't be ready for February, but hopefully, subsequently. And then the municipal facilities plan, I took that on kind of because we forgot to allocate that to somebody in the first allocation. So, I'm not leaping at trying to do it. And there was a municipal facilities plan in the past. I think it should be updated, but I haven't done anything on it at all. And I guess I need to follow up with Stu to find out who's responsible for doing that as a regular city exercise.
Okay, thank you. I have not made any progress on, where did it go? The one that's talking about natural gas appliance phase out. In my mind, it's still very important. And if anybody want to do volunteer to work with me on that, that would be lovely. Jillian? Okay, thank you. We have 4 minutes left. Stu?
Rick, you need everything submitted to you for the packet by February 2, Tuesday, I think.
Whatever you say, I haven't looked at the calendar. Normally after each meeting, I send out a reminder to everybody about what the schedule will be. And
Okay.
I will do so again.
Sounds good.
No, given the sensitivities of the council to the phase out, or as we use that term on any number of occasions early in our process, I would recommend that we change that SOU, ASD, OSF, AACH, natural gas phase out to emissions reductions.
I'm happy to do that. Chris?
I think that you could also add a housing capacity analysis update for that February meeting for me as well.
Okay. Okay, anything else? Okay, I think we have finished for the evening. Thank you, everybody, for participating and all your hard work. And we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Right.